This is number 3 in the last days of life on hospice care. Team communication is imperative. We have to be able to identify which patients are close to dying and then inform the team. If you're new to hospice care, sometimes this is difficult to recognize those signs that occur. So generally, in the last 3 days of life, we have very specific signs, and we all need to identify those imminent changes. What do those signs look like? Let's review. And remember, every death is very unique, and the signs that we're going to review are general changes, and every patient may look differently. But some people do, as I said, fall outside of the bell curve. Here they are. The patient might be reaching out or picking at the air, and they're unable to communicate at this time. The patient is unable to be aroused. You might even be pushing them or turning them, and sometimes even using painful stimulation when you're giving care. But then they return immediately to an obtunded or comatose state when that stimulation is removed. There will be changes in the breathing pattern. It can be irregular, slower, very fast, even gasping. Generally, there will be periods of apnea with lengthening pauses in between. It's almost like there's a switch that's turning the breathing on or off at that point. And there can be gurgling or congestion heard when they breathe. That's one of the hardest things for the family or the people who are actually in vigil to hear. And it really is just the cause of the air moving over the throat on that saliva that's collected in the back of the throat that they can't swallow anymore. Peripheral pulses may be really weak, very hard to find, and even absent most of the time in the feet first. The pulse could be very rapid, very irregular. There's going to be a decrease in the urine output. It's going to be very dark and maybe less than 100 milliliters if you have a catheter and you can actually measure that. Or they might have a dry brief for more than 12 hours. There is no intake of any more fluids. They cannot swallow safely. And the patient may feel really hot, get a fever, be very diaphoretic, being really hot and clammy, kind of wet to the touch. It's not associated with an infection. I often find it's because the patient has been very lovingly over-covered with multiple blankets by the family or the caregivers because they used to be really cold. The body's going to be very rigid, perhaps very stiff with an overextended, hyperextended neck. Maybe their mouth is open, or they could be really flaccid. Their eyes can flutter open when they're stimulated or just be at half-mast all the time, really with a fixed stare or even glazed over. Those are the general changes that we'll see, which indicate that a patient has moved from transition into the stage of active dying. If someone on the team sees these symptoms, whether it's the nurse, the social worker, the chaplain, or the certified nursing assistant, it's just imperative to communicate this not only with the rest of the primary team that are associated with that patient, so perhaps the aide sees it, and then that day she's got to notify the rest of the team, she or he. And also the triage department, using whatever system you use for communication. Remember, it has to be a nurse or a social worker who then can be scheduled to visit and care for the patient and the family the next day for Medicare to count it. Remember, even though Medicare doesn't recognize visits by the chaplain or the nursing assistant related to that percentage score, they are such primary members of the team. They need to be informed so they can be invited in to provide appropriate spiritual and personal care. We're going to tie this all up about HVDL in the next hospice video. Please join us at the Hospice Care Plan for so much more education about end-of-life care. Thanks.